So the ethical and moral challenges of policing are quite long. They don't follow the rules. This happens all the time. And then everybody says, well, it doesn't matter if you don't follow the rules. Well, the supervisor or the leader of the police department should not tolerate the small errors. They must go after every mistake down the road. Many of them do, not many, but a significant minority of police officers get in trouble because of excessive force and brutality. We've seen cases of that. They exist. They're probably about 1% to 4% at most, but they still exist, and this gets them in trouble. Economic corruption, taking money. It's easy to take money when you're dealing with prostitution, drugs on the street, gambling rackets, organized crime. The money's always flowing. And police are being bought every day. And if you have no character and you don't have effective leaders who won't tolerate it, then you're going to see this multiply. Unlawful arrest, arresting people for no reason. It does exist. Sexual misconduct on duty, I'm not saying off duty is fine, but on duty, when they're engaged in these behaviors, they frequently get in trouble with prostitutes on this. Abuse of power, just torturing people. Sometimes bad police officers make it a full-time job just to pick on certain people and torture them into oblivion. Violations of the public trust, such as lying under oath, perjury, all kinds of other offenses that relate to malfeasance in our courthouse. Overuse of alcohol and drugs and any crime they commit. And there's plenty of crime examples, from receiving stolen property to misprision, to obstruction of justice, to hiding things that should be turned to the other side, the defendant's side. Also, a few other thoughts here before we get to some of the other issues that I want to bring up today. And that is that part of policing's problem is that there is a problem with lying. So when they get caught doing things, they frequently go to the backdrop of lying. And lying, according to most police commanders, becomes an insidious problem. It spreads like wildfire. So there's an attitude that, well, I'm doing a good job most of the time, so I'm not going to tell you about this, or I'll tell you a false story about this. Well, that has the effect of multiplying. There are too many checks and balances in the world where leaders should never tolerate lying. Secondly, effective policing depends upon trust from the top down to the bottom ranks. Think about the FBI in its present state. I just mentioned that to you. The problem is not from the bottom up, it's from the top down. And that's on the 7th floor of the FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. Some people say if you cleared out the 7th floor, that would be 200 leaders in the FBI, the problem would start going away. 200 out of 35,000 agents, it's not a whole lot to expect. But somebody's going to have the moral grid, the moral power to start cleaning house. Lying, deceit, dissimulation, and fraud strike at the very heart of law enforcement and its people. You don't have to do anything in particular as much as you have to hide things all the time. And there's a lot of hiding that goes on, particularly when people get into trouble as police officers, or they have a friend who gets in trouble. So what they'll tend to do is they'll protect each other. So we do have a couple of ethical standards that get published, and I put 2 of them up here for you to look at and tell me why this is inadequate. This is the International Association of the Chiefs of Police, the largest police organization in the world. This is its ethical code, its code of honor. Is this going to assure what I'm talking about here, that police act virtuously, that police act with a moral compass, that police believe in the dignity of every human being? Is this going to assure that, or is there something missing here? What do you think? Can you see it? Anybody? It sounds good, doesn't it? Nobody? Nobody wants to say one thing about this, huh? Yeah, do you? Okay, well, Doug?
I have no idea what that means.
You want to elaborate on that?
There are no specifics.
That's correct. It's very flowery and very, sounds great, but what does it really tell the person to do? And how is this going to assure anything? Because anybody could read this and say, oh yeah, sure, I'm going to do all that, but you won't even have any reason why you would know how to do it or why to do it. That's the thing that's missing in this piece, just like all the ethical codes. It's even worse for lawyers. All you have to do is read the American Bar Association's, quote, Code of Ethics, and then you'll just start laughing because there's very little that's ethical in them. What there is a series of rules which you look at and find ways around, or find other ways of interpreting, or use as a defense mechanism against any claims that are made against you as an attorney. I'm not saying that they don't have some educational power, but what's missing in this is this spiritual dynamic. It's just empty of it. It's all flowery pablum. And really, this has been around many years, and I'm not sure it's done anything to improve. Because from my vantage point, as I write about lawyers and police and judges, for me, the most important thing is that they believe in something that is true and right and universally perpetual. And secondly, that they have virtue as the center of their being. This is what I'm doing here with a new master's degree in criminal justice, which was just approved by the state of Ohio, and we're waiting for one more little approval from the Higher Learning Commission. And that's what this master's degree does. It targets police leaders and forces them to consider things they've never considered. So they will be reading Thomas Aquinas. They will be reading St. Augustine. They will be reading natural law theory. They'll be exposed to things they've never thought of. And in the end, they're going to do the right thing because it is the right thing. It isn't because some code tells you that. It's because it is the right thing. There's only certain ways of handling people. You know it, and I know it. And it'll become second nature to them because it's going to be part of their DNA now, part of their fabric. I did a survey of 36,000 criminal justice practitioners on the nature of this new degree. I got letters back from police chiefs saying, my God, we have never needed this more than right now. I need it desperately to teach my people what matters, what's true, what's right. It's astounding how many of us think this way out there. It's just that we're not necessarily in a position of great power. Here's another example. This comes from PERF. And PERF is the Police Executive Forum. Here, I don't know, maybe you think this will solve the problem of ethics for policing, but I don't think it does. Let's conduct some research. Let's have some experimentation. Let's exchange ideas. That's kind of like that, get in a circle, be warm and fuzzy, and hold hands, and come up with millions of ideas. And yet, where does that get us? For policing, not far. Or two, substantial and purposeful academic studies. You definitely should avoid the academics as much as possible. Not the ones that work here. But if you go to Ohio State, or you go to Penn State, or you go to John Jay in New York City, you don't want their opinions on any of this because they don't believe in any of it. Anything I'm talking about is verboten. You can barely even discuss it in places like that. Religion, spirituality, virtue, truth are off-limit words. They're not acceptable in the academic environment. So I don't think that's going to help. But then 3, maintenance of the highest standards of ethics is imperative. Okay, that's right. It is. It is very important that we maintain high ethical standards. But based on what? You're back at the same problem as the IACP. The police must, within the limits of the law, be responsible and accountable to citizens as the ultimate source of police authority. I don't see that solving the problem of Derek Chauvin kneeling on the neck of George Floyd. And then lastly, the principles embodied in the Constitution. You think the Constitution is going to solve all these moral dilemmas and all these leadership problems? Not really, because the majority of criminal justice leaders hate the Constitution anymore because they're being crushed by it, by all the police oversight, so they become suspicious of it. So this formula doesn't work either. So what do we do? Well, we got to look for people that do have the capacity to be an effective police leader. And I say this right from the front here, that every effective police leader, he operates at 3 levels. Interiorly, as to your own character. You remember how character used to matter? When I first started applying for jobs, you had to apply character references. They would call your character references. They would do neighborhood, community, reputational studies on you. They'd spend a lot of time trying to figure out whether or not you were a person of reputation that was worth having, and secondly, whether you were a person of character. They don't do that anymore in most jobs. That's a waste of time, they think, because you can't measure character. It's too subjective. It's not objective enough, and that's why they like tests like the MMI, psychological, or they like something else that's objective that's been created to measure whether you're a good person or a bad person. I'm not quite sure any objective test is capable of that. I do know that your reputation in the community really does matter. So if I was to call up any of your neighbors in the community, what would they say about you? You would hope something nice. But if they turn around and say, he's one of the biggest jerks that lives on the block, then you're done. And I know it's subjective, but it's a tool to measure people. If you're a jerk on the block, you're going to be a jerk on the force. You're going to beat people up, you're going to push people around, you're going to bully, and do all kinds of other things. Interiorly and then internally, ethics, morality, virtue has to be part of your organization and your institution, no matter what it is. You cannot separate the interior from the internal, nor the last category, externally. You can't go into the world and say it doesn't matter what your character is and what you're doing in the department. What matters is what you're doing outside. And we do hear that all the time. I know I started to hear that with Bill Clinton, when they would say, he's a good president and it doesn't matter what his character is. Do you remember that? He knows what he's doing as a president, and we really shouldn't question whether or not his character is any good. That was the beginning of the end. I remember that. I've been around 10,000 years, so I can remember that discussion. Now today, that is a 100% guaranteed discussion, that the person has to be bifurcated, severed. What they do on their job and what they are as a person cannot be melded or matched. And that's a huge mistake that occurs at every level of leadership. A leader should be looking for good people who will turn out and do good things and moral things and virtuous things. A person who is riddled with vice, you don't want them around you because they'll bring you down as fast as they'll bring themselves down. That's why oftentimes people say to me, well, wouldn't you hire a drug addict? The answer is no. Under no circumstances, because what do drug addicts do? They lie, they cheat, they steal. They can't help it. They got to support their habits. Unless you live in some states that now have legalized everything. I heard in California, the great leaders in the Assembly of California, they just legalized hallucinogenics and magic mushrooms yesterday. It's great, isn't it? It just gets added to the pile of bad leadership. Qualities of an effective police leader challenges the status quo. How things have been. You will come into that, every department, every agency in the justice model. Well, that's how we've always, well, it's not right what you're doing. That's all right, well, that's the way we do it. So you have to be an effective leader, so you're not doing it anymore. I'm not going to tolerate this anymore. It's not going to happen under my watch. That's true in business, it's true in the corporate world, it's true in every facility you move in, no matter where it is. So an effective leader challenges the status quo. He accepts the fullness of the police personnel under command, and he rejects the bifurcation of the person and the police role. That leader need find people around him who are a complete package. I call it the fullness of the human person. Not just their occupational proficiencies or their professional skills and competencies, but their souls, what they are as people. They'll never let you down. They'll always be there with you through thick and thin because they have an inner moral compass. The effective police leader leads by example, and he shapes the culture of a police organization. Oh, there's nothing more true than this. Bad police commanders who have 500 or 600 people under their charge in large cities, they'll have a terrible 500 or 600 police officers who will try to get away with everything they can because the police commander tries to get away with everything that he can. He rejects the rigidity of the thin blue line. I'm sure you've heard of this expression. The thin blue line is when police surround each other and protect each other. There's a beauty in it, but there's an ugliness at the same time. Because the thin blue line, which is sometimes justified because police are being barraged with lawsuits and media attacks, and you want to protect your brothers and your sisters. It's natural to be that way in these contentious situations. I get it. But when you know that what you're protecting is evil and bad, the thin blue line doesn't matter anymore. And that protection has to melt away. And a good, effective leader says, this is not the thin blue line anymore. We don't protect the people who are bad. We only take care of the good. That's what an effective leader does. Or the great police leader will also reject by any means necessary, by any possible means, which means what? It means that since I'm going after bad guys and bad girls, I can do whatever I want to protect everyone around me. It's a self-rationalization which promotes poor behavior and bad policing. Because any means possible is not the rationale. It would be the legal and moral means possible. Anything else should be off the table. The immoral and the illegal are not part of the means or methodologies that police should apply. It's why police get into trouble, because they self-justify this. They also do it in the next category, which is called the noble cause. And they do believe they're in a noble cause because you know why? Because they are. What they do day to day is remarkably enviable for any citizen of the United States. You should honor them when you see them. Shake their hand and say, I'll never forget what you do. I do it, and I thank every one of them for what they do. Lastly, the effective leader rejects the slippery slope of compromising, seeing each case and disregarding the error. As soon as you start compromising, it just keeps growing. Never compromise on moral matters. Stay firm. Hold fast. Because as soon as you turn your head the other way, it just gets worse. The effective police leader, and we only got a few more slides. The effective police leader is proactive rather than reactive. All police leaders who are worth their salt get in the face of their people and tell them, I am here for you. I will help you every possible way, but don't you dare cross us. They're always not reacting to scandal, they're proactively trying to prevent or deter scandal. That's what an effective police leader does. The effective police leader also promulgates rules and codes and regulations that memorialize the standards, lays it out. Some of the police departments have long-winded but very effective explanations about what is acceptable behavior and what is not. It's essential you educate your members on that. Treat ethics and moral behavior as central in the police training model. The police academies are finally starting to pick up on this as well. I think our law schools have forgotten about it. But there is a return in most police academies to a discussion of moral goodness and character. And lastly, erect a meaningful citizen complaint system that's governed by both citizens as well as police. Those cities that only allow police to do it, their systems are terrible. Those cities that only allow the citizens to do it, they're even worse. So it's a blending of both worlds, trying to find out if there's something that went wrong. Okay, early intervention is extremely important for a leader in the police system. So you want to make sure, again, that you're not reacting, but you're proactively looking at your people and saying, this is a problem child. There's something wrong here. And this list that I have here is one of the series of variables that are used to identify troubled police officers. How much time they use of force incorrectly. How many high-speed pursuits do they go on? How many vehicle accidents have they been in? How many civil suits have been filed against them? In other words, how many times have they been sued? How many disciplinary actions from the supervisors above? And how many citizen complaints? So you use these variables to determine proactively, I've got a problem police officer here, and I need to either divert them, pull them off this particular assignment, or fire, terminate, or suspend them. And a lot of the cases in which you read about police scandal, everybody knew what they were like. All the rank and file knows what they're like because they're lone wolves. This is not generally how they act. Communicate the expectations, but also the process of discipline. You have to have a process. You can't just willy-nilly discipline people without a due process system in place. And most good leaders create that due process system. You get a hearing, you get to bring witnesses, you get to bring your side of the story. Apply the disciplinary process consistently and uniformly. Avoid arbitrary, capricious, and unequal application of discipline protocols. This is one of the great corrosive influences in police as well as many agencies, is that people are selectively picked for special treatment. No special treatment, everybody gets treated the same. Train police personnel in both theoretical and applied ethical methods. A real-world emphasis on ethical dilemmas takes shape in specific circumstances. It's not enough for us to talk the talk of ethics, but it's good when you create scenarios where people can test their own ethics against that. Integrate the community. Emphasize the role of character and virtue. Screen all prospective employees in the police system on character. Again, I'm back at it again. And reputation in the community. Create a character measurement tool. This has been a long ambition of mine. How do you do that? How do you measure character? I'm actually working with a former police commander whose article I will give you. He and I are working on creating a character measuring tool based on Aristotle. So we'll see how successful we are, and we'll also see whether or not the police departments will adopt it. I know they're not happy with what they have. The leader creates a culture of ethics and morality, and the opposite is also true. A bad leader creates the negative result. The leader leads by example, by implementing the standards and the processes, and the leader leads from the top down, never from the bottom up. And the example that I'm going to give you, you hand this out for me, is which will edify a lot of what we're talking about here today, is a short story by Police Commander Jeffrey Majors, who actually teaches in our criminal justice program as an adjunct. He lives in Louisville, but he retired as a police commander from Louisville, and he talks about the influences in his life from a leader that he had when he was very young, when he first became a patrol officer. And his leader at that time was a police lieutenant. He said, I'm not tolerating it, and I will never tolerate it. He says that has stuck with him his whole life. He is one of the most honest police personnel I've ever known. He's filled with integrity, and it's all because some leader shaped him and molded him and left an imprint on him that he's talking about 50 years later, still talking about it. It makes a difference in how we handle things. It really does. Well, I thank you very much for your time and attention. I might have gone a little long, maybe not too long. And I'm very, very blessed to have been with all the business majors, the Leadership Institute, and all the great work it's doing. It really has been my honor. Thanks very much.